Welcome, Sabina. It's absolutely a delight to have you here today. I know, where you are. We were talking, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. In London, it's 4 o'clock. So it's fabulous to have you on the Audacious Conversations, where we are redefining Audacity under the three pillars of courage, care, and non-conformity. And before we start, why don't we introduce you with something audacious about you?
Something audacious about me is I am paid to raise people's heart rates
Hmm.
because I work on leadership. I coach executives on leadership, and leadership is not rocket science. We actually know what to do around leadership. It's the doing of it that requires courage. And courage is when your heart is pounding and you're still taking action.
I love that. I love that. And you and I were talking about, as you being, how did you define yourself? A minimalist,
Contrarian.
contrarian, in which for me, my definition was a non-conformist. So this
Mhm.
is where we aligned. So which
Absolutely.
one of, indeed. So under the sort of three pillars of care, courage, and non-conformity, where does your energy go first to dive in?
The first one is care.
Mm.
And I can dive in if you want.
Yeah, no, I love that. Just, yeah, absolutely. Let's go there for you. So, how does that land for you? What does that
Mm.
mean?
Well, a central thesis of my book that just came out this year, Alina, You're the Boss, is that it is not power that corrupts us, it is pressure. Now, what do
Mm,
we mean by pressure corrupting us? Uh, I, Let me actually ask you, have you ever done something under pressure that you're not super proud of?
absolutely.
Right,
100%.
right. Are you willing to share? What do you tend to do when you're under pressure? That's not so good.
Whew, you're putting me in the hot seat already. It's interesting. I was thinking about this, Sabina, recently because I was even thinking of my own definition of success is how do we actually behave under a lot of stress? That
Yes,
is, the
yes,
definition of success. Because if you are able to keep that sort of head and heart open without
yes.
going into what I call huge anxiety and sort of panic attack, and
Right.
yeah, I think that would be so. And I had something recently as I was away in Romania at my own hotel, and there were so many things that didn't go right. I suppose they went wrong. I call it a comedy week. Nothing
Yes,
arrived on time, the wrong thing. And it's how do we then behave in those moments under pressure?
yes, yes, yes. And often what people do is they raise their voices or they get snippy, they get short, they forget about empathizing with anyone else. I'm not going to provide detailed instructions. You might micromanage. All of these things happen under pressure.
Mhm.
And so, what happens to the care element? It goes out the window. Now, pressure can actually be a really good thing. The whole diamonds being forged under pressure. And so how do we get from coal to diamonds? How do we harness pressure in positive ways? The fact is that we can never be pressure free. Our lives
Mm.
are filled with pressure, especially these days. But how do we make ourselves pressure proof? And once we do, we are not only taking care of ourselves, we're taking care of all the people around us.
I love that. The pressure proof for sure. I think, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there's pressure everywhere. And I had an immediate sort of reaction because I have a very good friend, Tatiana, who talks about intensity. It's a different
Mhm.
word of talking about pressure. And then,
Yes,
Sarah, who actually does a lot of work on pressure. So there is a lot of that around at the moment, and it's always been. So, how does your definition of a boss within that pressure cooker
mhm.
or pressure proof, that distinction, how does that look like?
Well, because when you're a manager, two
Hmm.
forces work in combination. One is pressure, and that
Hmm.
can corrupt your actions. And the higher you go, the more pressure you're under. So the more
Hmm.
likely you are, if you're not managing it, that your good intentions are going to turn into destructive habits. I know for
Mm.
me, it didn't just squeeze out my time, it squeezed out my humanity when I was under extraordinary amounts of pressure as a manager. And I'm happy to share that story at some point. But the second force that comes into play is power. Because we are in an elevated position of power, it isolates us, it insulates us from the effect we're having on people, and worse, the harm we might be creating. So power is also like a broken volume knob. Everything that comes up is milder than people are experiencing it. It's muted, it's cushioned in praise. So when an employee says everything is fine, they actually mean I've started a secret group chat about your management style. Similarly, everything coming from up down to the employees is amplified. It's more dire, it's more urgent, it's directed directly at us. It feels like a threat. So how do we manage the volume knob, the broken volume knob of power in the face of pressure so that we can raise our awareness of what's going on and how we're coming across?
I love that. I love that. And I mean, I suppose it is because it is interesting. Most people will think about, and I, for one, would use power corrupts to switch it, to have that distinction actually is the pressure that corrupts. And
Right.
also when you have both together,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
the amplification factor
Exactly.
and what that does.
Exactly.
So what would be, I mean, I suppose from your, I'd love to hear the story, you know, and again, we can all share stories as to, you know, what's the I wouldn't say the best way, but what would be a really optimal way to deal with those type of pressured situation when you also have got a lot of power.
Well, I'll start with the story. So when I first started managing people, for the first good 10 years or so, people told me I was one of the best managers they'd ever had. I cared about them, I coached them, I was very invested in their careers, gave them positive feedback when merited, and so on. Then everything changed. When I was almost full term pregnant, I also took on my boss's job. And then here I am coming back from parental leave, putting on lipstick for the first time in 5 months. And suddenly my assistant Lori calls me. Where are you? Steve expects you in 30 minutes. Lori starts reading me the memo I'm supposed to discuss with Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, while I hit warp speed somewhere around the on ramp. And that, Alina, set the pressure, set the tone, the volume, the intensity, as you say, for my return to work. Calendar jam packed, inbox overflowing, an infant at home, no sleep, no peace, no patience. And overnight, I morphed from being caring and compassionate to snippy and short. Still 5'3" short, but now also short tempered. I started to micromanage. Whenever somebody came to my office, I would put all 10 fingers on the keyboard and look over my shoulder, indicating, I'm very busy, you're less important than me, spit it out and move on. The worst part of this was I thought I was doing a great job. I was being so efficient until my colleague Joe stops by. And I take one look at Joe and my hands go off the keyboard because I know he's about to tell me some bad news. My shoulders start to tense up. And Joe says, do you know that Zach is crying in his office because of what you said? And that is the moment I realized that I had lost my humanity. How did I go from being caring and nurturing to this? Someone people apparently fear and really don't like. So that's why I've written this book, because I have so much compassion for managers who are under pressure. And I know that there are things we can do to change the narrative. So that goes to your question of, so what do we do about it? What are some of the ways to deal with it? Well, one of the things you can do to deal with it is to figure out how to switch from this power gap being a natural distance that's created with power, where it makes it hard to see things clearly. And we fall into this trap. Again, the more successful we are, the more experienced we are, we fall into something called the power gap of the singular story, where our view becomes the view. And of course, nobody wants to tell the person in the position of power they're wrong. So 9 times out of 10, your view might very well be right because you do have a ton of experience and expertise. But what about the times where it's incorrect, outdated, incomplete? So instead of a singular story, how do you invite multiple meanings?
Mm-hmm.
Multiple meanings. You might say, uh, what are the what are some other ways to think about this? Now, initially, nobody's going to give you an answer. So you might say, if we channeled our strongest competitors, how would they frame this challenge? If we talk to the media who want to dig up dirt, what would they say? So you can externalize it so people don't have to own that skepticism or that criticism, but now they're giving you that information. Some people start by another thing you can do is exercise what I tell my clients to do is your shut up muscle,
Mm-hmm.
which is don't be the first or the second to speak. Be number three or number last. Because once you speak, no one else wants to give out an idea or least of all disagree with what you're saying.
Mm. I love that, Sabina. And actually, there are two things that come, they're sort of occurring to me. One is you're very lucky to have had, I think you called him Zach, that had the courage to come and say to you. Because
Yeah.
actually, many people don't have that. So there must have been some trust, as you said, going from someone that they, used to call the best manager and loving you to that. Someone at least had the courage to come, and you had
Yeah.
the open arms to listen, as you said. And the other one, in the sort of the story um, of shut up muscle, not be the first, the second, or the last, is I work with someone quite a few years ago now. I mean, an extraordinary leader in many different ways, but he was always the first one to talk, which meant that he always missed many other perspectives. And I remember, it was a very simple tool that I said to him, you must just bite your tongue and be the last to speak. And he said, you must be kidding, Alina. He generally thought I was kidding. And I said, no, try it, which was excruciating to start with. But once you've got that muscle stretched and you practice, it was incredible what came out 6 months later. It's like, wow, I never knew my team was so smart. I never knew they had so many great ideas because they never had the space.
Yes, and think about the immediate lowering of the pressure on you. So it's hard. Maybe you literally bite your tongue at times because you really want to chime in. But once you shut up, you see what your team is capable of, and you don't have to jump in and be the only one who has to come up with ideas or work harder than everybody else combined.
Yeah, and that's actually very hard. I mean, and I'm talking from my own experience, especially as I work in the sort of financial services industry, where everybody is rewarded. And you mentioned Microsoft for having their great opinions, for being the
Yeah.
experts, for being the one that they will always have an answer. So to actually say to someone, you need to listen up, you need to be silent, they will think you are joking because they're not rewarded in that way. And it took me a long time to actually learn that one skill. I am still learning. I always say the road to mastery is a road. I even, my daughter just gave me a book a few years ago, which is how to listen. Because that's why I always say we have 2 ears and one mouth. But it's for people who have had that default for so long, it's a difficult skill to learn.
It is. And I give them a task to do, which is
Mm-hmm.
called taking margin notes. So in the margin of your notes, write down all of your ideas and thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
because then that frees you up and gets you back fully present. You're not worried about losing your ideas. And
Mm-hmm.
another magical thing happens, which probably happened with that colleague you were talking about, Alina, is when it is your turn to speak, you might notice that of the 5 things in the margins, 3 things have already been said by someone else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great. So now you have 2 things where you can add unique value. So this
Mm-hmm.
does not mean you completely staple your ideas at the door. You absolutely can raise your own ideas as well, but wait until others have spoken. So now you and them can leave feeling smart at the end of the
Mm.
meeting.
Yes.
The goal to just have you feeling smart and having all the answers, or for others to feel the same way?
Yes, and for that you need, I suppose, for those, and again, not defending anyone in those sort of positions of power. We start where you, we go back to where you started. They are under so much pressure. They would just want solution focused, solution driven. I don't have
Yeah.
time. I only have 10 minutes or 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Having the time or the energy to allow people to express their views is not in their mind anyway, not
Yes.
always possible. And that's
Yeah.
why it becomes their view.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly.
Yes, and again, I love that sort of the caring part, because the more you do it, the more you can access the empathy. The more, which empathy is, it's the curiosity and also being able to
Yeah.
listen to someone else's perspective,
Complete.
irrespective of whether you agree or disagree, especially if you actually disagree with someone.
Especially if you disagree. Yes. I often say, use two words, say more. And I use say more under two conditions. One, when I'm genuinely curious, and the other, when I'm genuinely judgmental, because it
Mm.
helps me. It's a reminder that the opposite of judgment is curiosity. And so if I park that judgment for just a moment and just say more, I learned, speaking of again singular stories, I've jumped to a singular story and therefore formed that judgment. Now I can give that some breathing room, hear more from them, and realize, oh, there was other stuff to the story.
I love that. Okay, Sabina, what's coming up to me is to actually know when you're in judgment. It's a great skill. That requires a very
Yeah.
high self-awareness
Yes.
muscle, because a
Yeah.
lot of people don't realize they are in judgment. So for you or anybody else who suddenly realizes, now I am judging, say more, it does require a high self-awareness, which is interesting.
It does. And so then the question becomes, how do you gain that self awareness? Because
Hmm.
that is so
Hmm.
difficult to do. One of the things that we know through science is that we often have a physical reaction when we're in that moment of judgment. So
Hmm.
figure out what is your physical reaction. You might figure that out after the fact. That's okay. But once you've figured it out after the fact, now you can be proactive about it. The tips of my ears get really hot. Some people's throat gets really dry. Someone else's heart is going to pound. Someone else is going to get butterflies in their stomach or sweaty palms. Whatever your physical cue is, start to tune into that. Because as soon as you know that your palms are sweating, likely whatever's going to come out of your mouth is not going to show caring, is going to show the underside of pressure, not the higher order way to manage pressure.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And actually, just going back to knowing your body and your reactions to all the, how do you react to some of these triggers? In my book, I have my first chapter. I have 8 A's of Audacious Leadership. And the first one is attunement, is how do you attune yourself to really
Yeah,
understand that language? For me, I
exactly.
do get an immediate reaction in my stomach and my chest. I want to
Yeah,
go into action and snap and say something immediately. When I'm in judgment. And then, and again, it's just practicing and realizing, noticing those type of reactions in the body. But
exactly
I'm
right.
I'm curious. I'm curious, Sabina, because we're talking about your book, which is You Are the Boss. Um, what if you were to summarize that sort of the inside of well, I suppose the most audacious part of that book for you? Which one would that be?
Well, the most audacious part would be changing our mindset around
Hmm.
not power, but pressure corrupting and then power isolating us.
Hmm.
And why is that audacious? First of all, it upends conventional wisdom and the way
Hmm.
we're thinking about things, but it makes it possible. And what makes it possible is now it puts the empowerment on you. You
Hmm.
have control over how you manage those pressure pitfalls and those power gaps. So that would be the biggest piece. And speaking of then, what do you do with it? Another way to audaciously think about something is to think small. So
Mm.
now that's a really counterintuitive thought as well,
Mhm.
because audacious often means big,
Mhm.
bold, go big or go home. No, it actually means Be as small as possible, because then you have a chance of succeeding. Now, that takes courage, because it's easy for someone to say, oh, yeah, I am running a marathon. It's harder for someone to say, I raise my running distance by 1/10 of a mile every 2 weeks. Now, guess what? Both of those things are true for me.
Mm-hmm.
I fantasized about running for a long time and never succeeded because I kept wanting to go for those big goals. Until 3 years ago, I said, I'm going to do this thing called micro habits that I write about in the book. And we're going to only increase the distance by 1/10 of a mile every 2 weeks. Even if I think I've got it, I'm going to wait for 2 weeks before I increase it. And this summer, I ran my very first marathon by slowly increasing the rate of running as well as the distance that I'm running. So, what do you do audaciously with power and pressure? When under pressure, do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I can dig into each of these in more
Mm-hmm.
detail.
Mm-hmm.
And when under power, say nothing. That's the shut up muscle that we just.
Mm.
So, audaciously thinking about pressure and power is about saying nothing and doing nothing.
I love that. I mean, that's such a wonderful, tool that it's so easily implementable. You can
Yes,
sort of implement, do nothing when you're under pressure, or say nothing when you have that power,
yeah,
because that takes courage to
it
bite
does.
your tongue and do both of those things. And you're
Huge.
right, is the sort of micro habits. It is audacious to go small. And I always, when I play with my own clients and my own family, it is about that 2%. What's the
Yes,
2%
exactly.
incremental increase?
Exactly.
5 minutes today, 6 minutes next week, and so on. And before you know it, it's the consistency of the practice, of course. You
Yes,
will run the marathon.
exactly.
And
Exactly right.
yeah, no, I absolutely, I love that. I love that, Sabina. So, I mean, and in terms of the, do nothing and say nothing, um, is there anything else that you would advise your clients to do or be under pressure?
Well, given that your clients and listeners are often in the financial sector, let's talk about a term that's familiar to you all, which is managing to a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
We often manage money in a portfolio. And what do we say is our most precious asset? Time.
Mm-hmm.
Why not use the same concept for time? That can reduce the pressure under us and make us more strategic. Now, a lot of time management hacks sometimes get us there, and sometimes they're like old New Year's resolutions. We do it for 2 weeks and then we stop. This is a more planful approach to thinking about your time. The way it works is consider the key chunks of time where you spend your day. So let's say you're a manager, you spend some amount of time managing your people, you spend some amount of time being managed by your manager, attending her staff meetings and whatever else she needs. Maybe you have some project reviews that you do. Perhaps you're focused on the external world in giving talks. And then you have a chunk of time on communication, email, Teams, Slack, what have you. You identify those buckets. List out approximately what relative percentage of time you're spending on each of those. Now think about where would you really ideally like to spend that time? Now here's the biggest mistake most people make. So let's say someone's spending 35% of their time on communication and they want
Mm-hmm.
that to go to 20%. The biggest mistake is to think big again, right?
Mm-hmm.
To go from 35 to 20, that's not going to happen. So you want to identify an intermediate step and an intermediate percentage. Very small. So if you're at 35%, what if I'm going to go to 33%? And my step might be I'm going to turn off all notifications.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm less often distracted by all the communication pings and zings and blips and boops that are going on. So that's the idea of a time portfolio is to think big and then act small.
Act small. I love that. Yeah, and it is, you're saying 35 to 33. So it's that sort of 2% concept. And it's interesting. To my clients, I say it's not about managing time, interestingly, it's about managing energy. which is,
Absolutely.
this, this the
Absolutely.
energy project. It's like, where does where do you put your energy? Because we all have the same time, 24 hours. And it's, in terms of where do we spend that energy, prioritization. And I love this idea of think big, act small.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It is a great, great tool. So I'm just realizing we've got sort of 5 minutes, I suppose, to just still talk about all things audacious, which is the small little things, the small audacious things. So,
Hmm.
Sabina, can I ask you a personal question?
Of course.
I mean, so what would be I suppose a small, big, you can choose audacious thing that, you would want the world to know about you.
A small,
Big, you
audacious.
choose what audacious. Yeah,
Okay, an
audacious.
audacious thing I would want the world to know about me. Well, let's pick a fun one. That
Yes.
is that I am trained in stunt fighting.
Wow. Tell me more.
When I was working at Microsoft, I was in school plays and theater, growing up all my life, loved being on the stage. And after a few years of working at Microsoft, I took an acting class at a local community college, loved it. And the teacher, who was fantastic, said, when you go out there in the real world to audition, don't get disheartened, because for every 100 auditions, you might get cast in one play. And I thought, no, I won't. I'm going to start my own theater company. And because then I can be cast in all the plays. And so that's what my husband and I did. And we ran this theater company for 5 years. Part of that was education. We invested a lot in bringing in instructors on different things. And stunt fighting was one of those things.
Wow.
Just loved it, fell in love with it, so enjoyed it, had a lot of fun. I was close to getting to the next level, but then discovered I was pregnant and decided it wasn't a good idea to do stunt fighting while pregnant.
Fabulous. But you did it for 5 years and you loved it. That's such a wonderful story of something, really audacious and unusual, because that's, for me, that's what Audacity is. It's experimenting with something. As you said, I'm going to be cast in all of the plays because they're going to be mine. So why
Yeah,
not? That is
yeah.
what the boss would do. And I love it. I love it. And, one of the things, I suppose, for me, I do make this distinction between a boss and the leader, because that's sort of, what's a boss, what's a leader. And for me, that the distinction is all to do with emotional intelligence, which we've talked about today. The self-awareness, the courage, the empathy, all of those things that make that jump from being the pure boss, that you've been given the role through just the job, and then owning it, and being the person that everybody loves to be led by.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then one of the things I think, I mean, what I would also love to, because you reminded me, can you show the audience your book? Just so that, I know you've got it in the background so I can see, it's beautiful, but here we go. You are the boss, the bold boss. Love it. Love it. Thank you. And so I also, I am celebrating, and you and I were talking just before we got on, I'm also sort of celebrating, it's a year this week since my book came out into the world, the Audacity Spectrum. And I just wanted to tell the audience, or I already made an announcement that any book that I am going to sell from this week on, the proceeds will go to a charity of choice. And I've chosen this year to go to Smile, Train UK, which they deal with children who have got cleft palate conditions, and they get operated, so we can put a lot of smiles on those children's faces and on the world.
That is so moving, Alina.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I mean, talking about caring for me, and again, when I sort of wrote the book, I started with, the book had originally courage, care, and non-conformity. So courage came first, because for me,
Mhm,
Audacity was always associated with the boldness and the courage.
mhm,
And then the
mhm.
more I thought about it, the more, the courage had to come second and care had to come first, which is where we sort of started, as you said, when you're under pressure, you start not accessing the care muscle. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, just reminding ourselves that we all have it all,
Yeah.
and with care we can do anything.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Just where can the audience find you? Where is, what's the platform of choice? Where can they find more about you?
LinkedIn,
Mhm.
Instagram, both of those are there. But the best place probably to start is my website, sabinanawaz.com. You can sign up for my Substack called Pressure Proof over there. If you buy the book, you can also download templates and tools and book club discussion guides right on that website.
Fabulous. So yeah, the Substack, as you said, in terms of where it is, website, LinkedIn, the same. The same with me, as most of my audience will know. It's the LinkedIn is the Audacious Leadership newsletter and the usual thing. But thank you so much for joining me today. We could probably have, talking for another hour or so about your concepts, which I love. But I'm taking away the the think big and act small. Thank
Mm,
you. And then we
mm.
should celebrate your anniversary, your 1 year anniversary next March, I think, on the 4th of March.
That's the deal.
Back here again.
Great. Thank you,
Fabulous.
Alina.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye bye.